Good afternoon. Welcome back. And for our first session this afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome President Felipe Calderon, President of Mexico from 2006 to 12, known to many of you. He was, at the beginning of his career, a law student, someone very committed to the rule of law and to democracy, and someone who showed that through his actions as president. And the idea is, I think, President, we have a little bit of a discussion about organized crime, democracy, threats to democracy and the rule of law in Latin America, and draw a little bit on some of your experiences in office and some of the lessons that we can learn from that. And I'd like to start out just asking you for a sort of broad view of where in the Americas you see the biggest risks to democracy at the moment and why.
Well, thank you. Let me say thank you first. I got it.
I think you have to.
Yeah, right. See, right. I want to express my gratitude for Alejandro Werner. And I need to say that I came because he invited me, because he really appreciated that.
Me too.
Very smart guy that could go easily to get a lot of money in the private sector. He has kept as a public servant at Mexico and then a universal servant at IMF and now academics, which is I believe those decisions, advocacy decision needs to be supported. Saying that, but definitely I believe that the greatest risk for democracy in the region is in Mexico precisely. Former President Cedillo wrote an incredible article, a very good one, that anyone interested in democracy or in Mexico must read. And he said that the expression is, the young Mexican democracy has been killed. And indeed, what happened in the last government, I don't remember who was the president, it's not, but that government started a process of demolition of democratic institutions. And that process was exacerbated in the last 12 months. Indeed, after the elections, well, Morena, the ruling party, took over the control of electoral institutions, the INE, the tribunal, and now that institution decided to give to Morena a control over the Congress that never got in by the votes. So quickly, Morena won, we believe. They got 54% of the votes, but breaking the law and creating a real rupture, a constitutional break, they gave to Morena 75% of the seats in Congress with no justification. And then extorting a couple of senators more, they were able to change the constitution to create another constitutional break, which is disappearing the judicial branch. Literally. All the ministers, why? Because the Supreme Court was the only counterweight, the counterbalance, the only one in the country to the president. So they fought the minister of the Supreme Court, 11 ministers, 1,000 of judges, maybe 1,000 of magistrates. All of them were fired 2 weeks ago. And now the judicial branch is in the hands of militants and supporters of Morena. Some of them were lawyers of narco-traffickers, others are people without experience. And to end with this, there are no guarantees anymore for any citizen, let alone for opposition people.
And as you said, President, I mean, that process started under the previous Mexican government. I was very struck at the time covering what was happening there and in Brazil, that in Brazil we saw a very strong engagement by the US government behind the scenes in favor of institutions, in favor of the Supreme Court, sending strong messages to the military not to interfere. In Mexico, we saw no such engagement. Could the US have done more to save democracy in Mexico?
You say the Americans?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to say what the Americans could do. But what is clearly is that this demolition process happened, I don't know if the expression is correct, but just under the noses of the American ambassador And I'm talking about this, not talking about this administration,
the
previous
Biden
administration. I don't know, because that ambassador just didn't realize what exactly was happening, or he just ignored that, which is terrible. But let me be honest on this. I believe that since maybe 1 decade or more, we know that the foreign policy of the United States is much less concentrated in the protection and defense, the universal values as democracy of human rights, and more oriented towards the American interest, which is, I believe, is logic. Especially now, it's clear that the government received a mandate, a clear mandate from the citizens, the voters, to focus on national interests. So this idea of the America first implies that. And that implies as well that we need to work in our issues ourselves without expecting.
But then presumably we should also make the case that the American national interest is served by having democracies in Latin America, right?
Well, in the case of Mexico, for instance, of course, it's the second biggest democracy, or used to be a democracy. I honestly believe that free and fair elections are on risk in Mexico, and there won't be free elections probably anymore. And it's the second biggest and the most important for the United States. And it happened in an open. Let me tell one thing about this, talking about fairness. Carlos Ursúa, who was nothing less than the Secretary of Treasury, Secretario de Hacienda, for López Obrador, wrote like 2 or 3 articles last year telling this, that Morena, the government, presented and got approved a budget that was overestimating the payment for seniors people. He estimated that the excess of budget was roughly 50 mil millones de pesos, is equivalent of $2.5 billion. Let me say it, $2,500 million, the equivalent. And Ursúa said that money will be deviated to support the Morena's campaign. And that he says that before he passed away, like 2 months later, that, but accidentally. By the way.
I remember I was very struck when I went to Mexico during the election campaign, that I went to a rally by Claudia Sheinbaum, and at the end of the rally, Gerardo Fernández Noroña, the official from Morena, got on the stage and he said, "We want to make sure that not just that Morena wins this election, but that the opposition never, ever return to power in Mexico." So, as you said, this was very clear, wasn't it? This wasn't hidden. This was a very open objective.
So, actually, maybe it will be a local joke, but there is a very famous song that was fixed by Oscar Chavez Say. It's the name is La Casita, no? It dice más o menos, it's a local joke for somebody. Dice, que de dónde amigo vengo, de una casita que tengo por allá por Tepoztlán, no? The Fernández Noroña bought a house of roughly like a $100,000. And that money came when he was president of the Senate, with absolutely no transparency. So, I'm deviating about it. But let me go back. If you, maybe you, as a good journalist you are, maybe you asked about who paid that rally for Claudia Sheinbaum. Nobody knows. Even her didn't know. So the pre-campaign was paying, but people that nobody of her knew that. It was, of course, any governor of Morena was paying the events of the pre-campaign. And again, in the campaign, not only the very high budget that Morena had, but also these $2.5 billion that Ursúa estimated that the government deviated illegally to Morena, play in the field. Is that a fair election? It is not. Morena won, yes. Claudia won, clearly. Overwhelming, yes. But it was a fair process? Definitely not. Is there any element that could guarantee to the Mexicans for next election that there will be any fairness in the process? Definitely not. Is that a democracy? No.
Do you see any way for citizens in Mexico to organize to help ensure there is a return to democracy?
Oh my God, I'm very skeptical about that. One of the most important political phenomena in the last year was the massive rallies to defend the electoral authority. And I used to say, after the first rally, maybe, and the first somebody estimated hundreds of thousands of people in Mexico City, and the second, roughly close to 1 million people mobilized in Mexico City, and roughly in 100 more cities in the country. I believe the next rally needs to go not to the Zócalo. The next rally needs to go to the door of the political parties, PRI, PAN, and PRD, to claim the openness of those parties to the citizen. So one of the problems is the authoritarianism of the former government. So the former president never was a Democrat, never has been a Democrat. And it was clear that he was getting the power through democratic means. He was going to destroy democracy, like many populists in the region and in the world, and exactly that happened. But the second problem, that's the weakness of the opposition. And the case of what used to be my party, I resigned to the PAN in 2018. The PAN was able to resist 70 years in the opposition under the autocratic regime of PRI. And the key strategy, maybe not explicit and maybe even not deliberated, but was to recruit every campaign new citizens, the best and brightest in any single community. And you can call for 10 and only one accepted either to be candidate or member. But after that, the PAN was renovated its base with better people every single time. But once we got in power, the people who control the party, a Democratic Party, understood that the list of members of the party, el padrón de militantes, was the key issue to keep the power inside. So they blocked the entrance of new members since roughly like 2007, 8. And because, or maybe before, and then the PAN was unable to renovate itself. And this camarilla, this small group controlling the PAN, because that's the only way in which they could get budget positions, some contracts, even with some local governments. This camarilla kept the power in the PAN. So that's the reason blocking the entrance to the citizens is the way, there's some kind of suicide for political parties. And then this suicide is one of the reasons why there is no political instruments for the citizens to change the situation by now. I hope the parties could open the door. The PAN, the PRI, PRD, MC, the new one, which is, we created a very powerful party, by the way, Mexico Libre. We got the unanimous authorization at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the INE. 3 hours later, we lost the vote like a 7-6 or something, or 6-5. What was the reason? We received donations with credit cards. We exhibited not only the receipt of the credit card, which it was your reference, so the place, the moment, the amount, a letter from the donor say, I'm Michael, I'm the donor.
You're very transparent.
Yes, and the reason to reject the register is because, wow, but that receipt only exhibit the 4 last digits of the credit card. That's anonymous people, crazy. The stupid thing. So now, there is no way to participate so far, and that's the problem why I don't see by now the chances to revert the situation.
And of course, the history is that Mexico had a one-party system for most of the 20th century, 70 years. The one Vargas Llosa called the perfect dictatorship. Was it maybe inevitable that Mexico was going to fall back into that model again after a brief flowering of democracy after 2 decades? Could it have been different? I mean,
I can see what is happening. It's incredible, but there are countries like Bolivia, Argentina, Ecuador, that after several years, even decades, or populism, and in some cases authoritarianism, they were able to come back.
Yeah. But a shorter time, no? Mexico was a very long time, it was 70 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about the current situation, no? No, 70 years. Oh my God, was incredible. But anyway, now, my main concern is because these guys are destroying the legal guarantees. So they have been very smart, if I can say that, con una astucia brutal. So he saw that the key issue to stay there forever, as Noroña says, is destroying legal guarantees. That's the reason the judicial branch was fired. That's the reason they destroy the electoral institutions. Destroy any way in which you can guarantee to the citizens to come back one day. That's it. So I'm very skeptical. By the way, talking about la dictadura perfecta, you remember that expression of Vargas Llosa? He say, it's the perfect dictatorship. Why? Because there is one group designating all the governors, all the mayors, all the power in one group. But nobody in the world is criticizing that because it simulates a democracy.
Yeah, they have elections regularly.
Well, now let me go to this situation. The fall of the Mexican democracy is the worst news story in the region and is the worst covered. Why is that? Why nobody is talking about what is happening in the Mexican democracy? It's a question for a great journalist.
It's a good question. I mean, I was struggling with that too during the last government when the institutions were being attacked and dismantled, and there was very little comment about it. And I think part of the reason was because the governments successfully presented a narrative that they were a government of social justice, they were championing the poor, they were inclusive, they were dealing with lots of things that had been left for a long time, and they had a lot of popularity. They had a lot of popular legitimacy. So that made it very easy for them to sell the idea that they were a government acting in the best interests of the people. I mean, that's the best answer I can give.
It's a very good one. Yeah, and in fact, I believe the same. As long we have the politically correct profile in government currently, so a politically correct female left government cannot be wrong, which is this kind of prejudice are contributing to this terrible situation we are passing through.
I mean, there was an enormous contrast with Brazil, where Bolsonaro's attacks on democracy institutions met with enormous condemnation in the media, from the Biden government, from human rights organizations. I mean, there's a very loud chorus of protest, and correctly in my view. However, in Mexico, similar attacks on democracy, nothing like the same response at all. There was a silence.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think it's so evident. Since López Obrador, I compete with him in 2006, and I won with a narrow margin, but I won. He tried to do the same. I don't know if it sounds familiar to you. He tried to take over the Congress, to physically prevent me to get to Congress. At that time, the Constitution said, if the president is not present in the session, the Congress will call for a substitute immediately. So it was an attempt. It's a coup d'etat. Fortunately, I was able to surpass that and arrive to the Congress, and was like a very nice story. It's not time to do that, but nobody say that globally, I believe. Well, anyway, that's good for Brazil. It's good for democracy that they were able to overcome the coup d'etat tried by Bolsonaro. Let's see what is going to happen this week with the tribunal.
I think it'll be quite messy.
Yeah, he will be condemned, definitely. So good luck with that.
But if we turn for a second to back to the idea of organized crime.
Yeah.
I mean, you studied law, you believe strongly in the rule of law. What lessons do you think you can offer from your experience fighting crime and fighting to preserve democracy in Mexico about what works and what doesn't work?
But first is you need to understand that this is not about drugs itself. You correctly say organized crime. And fighting crime, and especially organized crime, on top of everything, it's a moral duty. It's a legal duty. Actually, the first mandate you receive as president is to obey and enforce the law. Protesto, guardar y hacer guardar la Constitución. Of course, implicitly, there are a lot of duties of government, education, health, whatever. But you are not mandated para distribuir mochilas escolares, desayuno. You are mandated to enforce the law. It's a duty. It's a constitutional duty, and in my opinion, it's a moral duty. Second, what it works and is needed badly in the region and in Mexico is to build law enforcement agencies and institutions. Why? Because I think it's like a race between the state and organized crime. When I took office, for instance, I can see a process in which the government or legal institution was deteriorated, infiltrated, corrupted, and going down dramatically. And at the same time, the inverse process is organized crime was growing dramatically as well. So the only way is to try to rebuild the law enforcement institution, to assign the right budget, to try to rebuild those, to create a new body like Plataforma Mexico, it's Policía Federal itself, whatever will happen. But the point is to create new bodies at local level, judges, judicial reform, by the way, a new legal framework, etc. And at the same to combat organized crime, because it's the worst threat to national security. From my point of view, it was not a point to fight drugs itself. It was a point to enforce the law, because I believe this is the only way in which you can prosper. And second, because if you don't fight organized crime, they will capture the entire state, territorially and in upper levels, even higher levels every time. So what is work? To believe on that. Second, to work together. Let me put a couple of examples. Baja California, Tijuana, we realized that the municipal police was doing by itself most of the kidnapping events in Tijuana was made by the policemen. So we needed to clean the local police, put in new people with vetting process, etc. Then the crime sent us a message that if we continue to renewing local police, they will kill 2 new policemen every single week. And actually they started to do so. So we talked, the governor, the mayor, and myself, we decided to continue, to try to protect the new policemen, etc. But at the very end, it worked. So the crime in Tijuana reduced by 60% from its peak. It's Ciudad Juárez started with a governor that only was asking for money and support on one hand, and the other blamed me, accused me about the situation on the other. Then a new governor came, he decided to cooperate, we worked together, work with civil society to create committees among the society. And finally, Ciudad Juárez was roughly a case of success. Homicides went down by almost 80% from its peak. And the same in metropolitan zone of Monterrey, the crime went 93%, something like that.
And you had some of these success stories, but I think overall homicides went up year after year, not for the...
Yeah, but at the end, at the 2 last years of my government, homicides went down by 25%, and that trend continued 2 more years under President Peña Nieto. What happened then? They lose the effort, to be honest. They abandoned the effort. They reduced the budget. They stopped to establishing the vetting process in the police corps. They stopped to renovate. And then homicides start to going up again in 2015.
So you would say that you managed to turn the tide?
Indeed, yes, I do.
Yeah.
We do.
And then what?
And that trend continued 2 more years.
And then your successor left it. He abandoned that.
I don't know who, but yes. Yeah. They didn't continue that. So the process was abandoned in 2013 and was reverted in 2018. Actually, it's dramatically. They stopped the car and they make a U-turn in 2018.
And what about the penetration of organized crime into politics? I mean, that's something that was talked about a little bit this morning. How big an issue is that, do you think, at the moment, the region?
Well, definitely it's very high and it's bigger than anyone could think, no? So what is important to do is it happened to me in several levels, even at cabinet level. I have my skeptical or some doubts about that because Garcia Luna maybe, but there is in any level of government. And what you need to do is to establish a system in which organize some kind of internal counterbalance, external counterbalances, to innovate and improve the vetting process, to pay it a better way, to recruit people, not only by the money, but people who really have some kind of mystic, some kind of principles, some kind of values, people who really believe that it's important to care about your family, your society, your community. But the level of penetration of organized crime is huge. And if you allow them, you continue the policy of hugs, not bullets, whatever, they will grow and grow and grow and grow like a cancer, and there will be a moment in which it's going to be quite difficult to revert that. And I honestly appreciate what is the current government is doing. President Sheinbaum and the people around her. The news about this week. Where is that penetration? The penetration in the most maybe pristine or isolated army force, which is the Navy. They were managing at the level of the nephews of the secretary, which means at the level of the office of the secretary. They were managing the huachicol, which is the stolen gasoline.
Fuel theft, yeah.
Fuel theft, yes. I need to learn a lot of things in English. Yeah. Huachicol. They were managing that, millions of dollars. So it was so brave, and the government need recognition about that. The government had the political will to go after those Marines, which imply to fight against a lot of interest inside. So at what level the corruption is, I think losing the controls, reducing, or bajando la guardia, changing the tactic, that allows the criminal to penetrate at municipal level, at the state level, and at federal level, and the armed forces everywhere.
And also to move into new businesses, no? And I know you've said before that we talk a lot about drug crime, but extortion is actually a huge legal business, right?
Yeah, I used to quote a teacher of Kennedy School, alma mater, Tom Shelley. He wrote a beautiful article in 1973. It says, the real business of organized crime is extortion. And indeed, we are very familiar with the idea that organized crime is exactly similar to narco-traffic. It's related with, but it's not narco-traffic. It's probably one of the business they run. The key issue is in which the criminals, for several reasons that maybe is not the time to explain, they just started to expand and look for something that they were not looking last century, which is territorial control. My own explanation is several ways. One, the assault weapons ban expired in 2005 in the United States, and that allows to sell thousands of weapons to the Mexican cartels. Actually, my government seized 185,000 guns and weapons. 80% or 90% of them were sold in American territory. So that destroyed let's say, the balance relativo between law enforcement and any level and criminals. And second, and most important, Mexico and other economies started to have more income capacity in their society. According to the economists, I have very brilliant.
The criminals became better armed than the police.
Well, the one side, yeah, with much better weapons. So there, Pueblo Nuevo, Durango, no? 10 policemen with 30 revolver, 38, And suddenly 3, 4 suburbans appear with people with machine guns and missile launchers and whatever. So what can you do? No? But the other point is, for me, most important. The Mexican economy, after the efforts of several presidents or governments with ups and downs, mainly after the third year of Cedillo, once the crisis of tequila passes, Mexican society started to recover income capacity. And according with microeconomic, once your budget restriction goes up, your basket of consumption increases. So you start to get more consumption of more goods and services. One of those goods and services was drugs. It was not considered at the beginning. So the kids go, or people go to the table dances or bars or whatever, start to use drugs. It was not a market before. Now it's a new market. And the only way in which you can control a territorial market is by territorial control of the forces. So it's not the same to sell coffee by tons from Colombia to the world than to sell cups of coffee in Starbucks. You need to control the point of sales. It's a different business. One is about transporting drugs, it's exporting drugs, let's say, and the other is retailing drugs. As long as the criminals started to retail drugs in the cities and towns, they needed the territorial control of those point of sales. And that started to expand the territorial control, and that is part of the violence, because when they were controlling only routes, it was only a line in the map. When they tried to control cities, so a route was, for instance, Ciudad Juárez, but when they tried to control the city for the point of sale in Ciudad Juárez, they started to fight each other. That's the origin of the violence. It's not the action of the government itself. Well, that's the point. I believe that this expansion of the crime takes them to try to look for the control of the government, of the cities, and then the governments, and then different levels of governments.
And if we're looking at ways of combating this, President Bukele in El Salvador has offered a model for how to fight crime, particularly gang crime. He has reduced extortion and murder enormously in El Salvador. Now, more and more Latin Americans saying they want to see a Bukele in their country. Ecuador's President Noboa has said he wants to copy part of Bukele's strategy. What's your opinion about how effective the Bukele method is?
Well, in a matter of crime, has been effective. We need to recognize that. However, saying that, I believe that sacrificing human rights, rule of law, again, guarantees for everyone, it's a very high price that, for me, is clearly not the solution. Because I know the people is absolutely tired about criminals. But if you sacrifice freedom for security, that's paraphrasing at Churchill, no? At the end, you will lose freedom, and later on, you will lose security as well. You are now under the threat, and you are afraid of the criminals. Tomorrow, you will be afraid of the government. And later on, we'll be afraid of the government and the criminals, because maybe one day they will be the same, which is what's happening in a lot of governments. No? Authoritarian regimes trend. So crime, organized crime, it's a monopoly. So they try to act as a monopoly. That's the reason they cannot compete under market reasons in a city. They need to eliminate the other.
So Venezuela, perhaps, is an example there. Of where,
but it's a narco state. It is not because President Trump say or because Rubio say. They are true. It's a narco state. Most of the drugs of cocaine are coming from Venezuela. I remember I used to see those maps. The radars are able to detect the irregular flights. No, there is like a small plane that is in this way and suddenly go that way, or it's taking a route that is going to nowhere. No? So the algorithm are able to detect those irregular flights. When I took office, I remember the map was plenty of red lines from Colombia all the way to Mexico. So when we started to act, this map, we could see how these lines started to move to the Caribbean and start to move from Venezuela to the Caribbean Sea, through Honduras, basically, bit of the coast of Nicaragua, Guatemala, and of course the coast of the Caribbean, but far away in the water. So now it's facing but the problem with Venezuela, clearly, they are controlling.
So there's no doubt in your mind that Venezuela is the narcos.
No. That's the reason why the militaries in Venezuela, whatever could be the price, they don't want to lose the power because they are at stake. They know what they're doing. There are no legal way out for them. They need to survive killing and arresting people there, unfortunately. I hope that could be reverted very soon.
But of course, we've seen this recent US strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. I mean, that was a new phase in the war on drugs. The first time, I think, that a drone or missile's been used to kill drug traffickers in international waters. What's your view about the effectiveness of that tactic?
It's going to be difficult, but my God. Well, one of the, there will be an impact on those guys in that area. So they will reduce the traffic through the Caribbean on temporary basis, honestly. I don't believe the Americans will stay with aircraft or portaaviones, submarinos. It's going to be impossible to sustain that campaign on that. Julio was saying that it's only for 3 months. Where are you, Julio? 3 months, that's the agreement, or something like that. So, and the drug, as long as the demand, si la demanda continúa, it's going to continue, the drug will pass through other side. Right. It could be go back to Colombia, and more pressure on Colombia, Central America, and the Mexican Pacific, probably.
So it'll just displace?
Could be. And the other is going to be the impact in the market. But that's a different thing. I think it's very limited effects, but for media purposes and political support, it's amazing what they are doing. So the Americans will be, well, somebody is doing something, finally. And they are true, maybe. Yeah. Skeptical.
So you would not advocate that Latin American governments should copy that example and start blowing drug boats out of the water?
My God, it's like to kill flyers with machine guns, no? Matar moscas con cañones is going to be difficult. Anyway, no, but something needs to be done, definitely. And I think the commitment of the American government, I think, is plausible. It's encomiable. I think it is important to get advantage of that. Because, honestly, people criticize me a lot all the time. But anyway, I don't want to say I don't care. But one is, I don't regret that when I was president, Mexico reached the highest level of cooperation ever with the United States. And it was not Republican or Democrats. I had an incredible relationship with President Bush, an incredible relationship with President Obama. And we were able to share intelligence. That's the reason we signed the Merida Initiative that allow us to work together strongly and to channelize resources for our effort to rebuild institutions and providing more capacity for the agencies. And it worked. Somebody criticized me that Calderon had not intelligence. Honestly, we had the best intelligence in the world, which is the American intelligence. And I think that is needed. No, that is needed, and you need to canalize in an institutional way.
And I think we want to leave a little bit of time for questions, if we may. But before we pass to your questions, just a final one for you, President. I mean, organized crime in Latin America has grown steadily stronger, richer, more powerful over the last 2 decades, and governments have not yet managed to halt that process. How do you see the future? Where do you think the region is going to be in terms of security and democracy in a decade's time, based on the present trends?
Well, first is international support is on the basic. So I hope that the Americans could continue to support the countries or the governments that want to do something. That's important. But if not, honestly, it's 101 of government. The 101 in government is you need to assign your priorities, and then you need to decide your priorities, and then you need to assign the budget to your top priorities. And if the priority is enforcing the law, facing the crime, you need to assign the resources for that. Maybe you need to sacrifice from other parts, no? Yeah, if you want to distribute backpacks for scholars, it's fine. But the 101 is if you want to fight a crime, you need to put the money in that part. And let me see, this as the criminal, they have a lot of money. It's going to be impossible. Yes, they have a lot of money. I don't know how much, maybe 1, 2, 3 points of GDP. Well, let me tell you one thing. The government has a lot of money as well. 25, 30% of GDP, 20, whatever. You can win that battle. And the winning that battle doesn't imply to disappear the drug. That's impossible. But it implies to recover the control of your own land, of your own territory, to be able to protect a family, to be able to protect a female student that is under risk of the criminals because she needs to walk in the street. You need to recover that capacity to protect your people. And that is your main issue as president. Poor or rich country, you need to do exactly the same. And you have the resources to do that.
And you also need international coordination, right, to fight these guys. And that's hard, right? Because Latin America right now, you have a lot of presidents that are not even talking to each other.
Yeah, no, but before that, you need national coordination. Probably that was a very painful part in my government. Look at me. I was a president without majority in Congress, not in the Senate. I was a president where 25 out of 32 governors belonged to other parties. I was a president where in a country with 2,500 municipalities, only 200 belong to your own party. And then you have, I tried to create, and is needed, a national police, and actually I believe in that. It's important to create, again, a civil national police. But there are local police corps in any state, plus local municipality corps. And most of them, some of them were in absolute complicity with criminals. Some cases now, Guerrero. So Guerrero, last week, under the Deputy Secretary of Government was killed. And the governor don't say any single word about the criminals. Say, oh, our condolences to his family. But no one word. And you can see videos in Guerrero of political leaders talking with criminals. Nothing happened. The mayor of the capital of Guerrero was decapitated 8 days after to take office. And his head appeared in the capital of the state of Guerrero, in the street, in front of the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch, the governor's house. What is happening with that? Of course, all the state of Guerrero, the governor, the municipals, all of them are in the hands of Morena. They are powerful. So, what was the question, my friend? I got lost in this.
Well, we were talking about the future and whether it might be better.
Yeah, the future.
But probably not. Well, we should leave a little bit of time for questions, I think, because I'm sure the audience has questions. No?
Yeah, unfortunately, we'll only have time for one question.
Only one?
That's
Oh, goodness.
okay.
Let's do it.
But it'd be a really important question.
Got one in the front row, I think. These two, yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Hi, President Calderon. I'm a real admirer of your presidency. My name is Victor Linaldi. I am just graduated from the Harvard Kennedy School. I would like to say that the reason I chose that school is because of you, following your path. And my question is, we know that this current party, Morena, it's building this authoritarian machine, and they have it ready. But they still, even though they're doing many terrible things that we understand that it's happening, they still have the popular vote. And the reason they have the popular vote is because they have a great narrative to bring the people to follow them. So my question would be, if we want to build an opposition to try to generate solutions for the country, what would be that narrative that we should stand for? If there's a new party, if there's a coalition of parties, what is that powerful narrative so other people can follow and we can actually do something? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, I apologize with you if you decide to go to Kennedy School for me, but no, it's an honor you say that. Well, second, I agree with you. One of the problems is the narrative, but it's not the only one, and it's not the most important. To be honest, people are happy with this government because they are distributing a lot of money, public money. So for most of the families, it's the first time they receive such amount of money. We can discuss that if that public policy is sustainable in time, if you can afford to have a 6%, 6 points of GDP of deficit every year, or it's going to happen exactly what happened with several populism. That's the case of Argentina, for instance, that they were able to stay in power at least 2 decades or even more, paying and paying and paying, until the moment in the economy just se rompió, ¿no? Se acabó, trono. So that's a different discussion, but that's a matter of fact that is happening. Second, my main concern is people have not channels for participation. So I say, I would love to see all that people that march in Mexico City and other cities defending the electoral institutions, being able to defend or at least to count the votes in las casillas last election. It's incredible that the political parties in the opposition were to cover only 42% of those casillas, como se llama, custom ballots or
The polling stations.
polling stations, yes.
Yeah.
Well, so people want to participate. People are concerned about that, but there is no way to do that because the political parties are this size. How bad is the thing that now the national hero is Alito? Oh, my God. Oh, he did very well in that performance. But the different thing is people have not chances for participation. And third, the narrative. We need to build the right narrative, which is going to be more complex and more difficult. Always the populist narrative is going to be easier to explain and to understand. It's black and white. So the country was completely damaged. We suffer, we are poor. These guys, neoliberals, Prian, etc., are guilty. They are rich. They are no indigenous, it's white, and they are against us, the elite, the mafia, the fifis. And the other side is the pueblo bueno, the good people. And of course, I'm the leader of the pueblo bueno. In that side are the Spaniards, in this side is the indigenous. It doesn't matter that I have a grandfather, that López Obrador had a grandfather came from Spain to Tabasco, but he's the representative of the nose against the Spaniards. Well, wait. So that narrative is quite easy. And unfortunately, the coalition in 2021 and 24 confirmed that narrative of the sea of the people. Well, these guys allied themselves. And honestly, there are differences. I believe that the narrative should be different. We were coming from a disaster in the country 4 decades ago. A country with hyperinflation, with very high corruption, with a disaster in public finances. So the governments needed to establish some kind of discipline to reduce inflation, to reduce the deficit, to establish new bases for development, to build the institution of rule of law. So that effort made Mexico, honestly, a very competitive country in several fields. When I took office, Mexico was the 9th exporter of vehicles in the world. When I finished, Mexico was the 4th and sometimes the 3rd exporter of vehicles in the world. The expression moment of Mexico was coined Mexico looks like a country what is going to be able to jump into development. Middle class was created and over. There was corruption, but honestly, our governments, folks and mine at least, and I believe Cedillo, you cannot say this guy, Robert Money. You can accuse me with a lot of things, but only corruption was not the mantra, that was not the rule. I believe the highest corruption in Mexico was in recent years, let me say that.
Thank
But
you.
anyway, well,
Thank
sorry.
you. I mean, we've got our last one. No, we're out of time.
Last one, this guy.
Okay. Sorry, apologies. And thank you, President
No,
Stott,
thank you.
for a really
Thank you,
interesting
Alex.
discussion.
All right, we're going to go directly into our next panel. So if all of the participants could please come to the stage, and we'd like to welcome two virtual participants as well, Tom Ginsberg and Javier Corrales.